The wind in the New Mexico territory did not just blow, it scoured. It carried the taste of copper and dried sage, seeking out every crack in the timber walls of the boarding house to deposit fine layers of red grit. It was 1859, and the town of Cinder Creek sat on the edge of the red desert like a mistake God had forgotten to erase. May Harper wiped the rough pine of the corner table, her movements rhythmic and practiced. She used a square of blue cotton, a bandana that had once been vibrant but was now faded to the color of a bruised sky. That blue bandana was the only soft thing about her current existence. At 25 years old, May felt as though she had lived 3 lifetimes, each harder than the last. The boarding house was quiet for the mid-afternoon, save for the low hum of flies near the window and the scratch of a boot heel against the floorboards. It smelled of stale coffee, bacon grease, and the perpetual dust that coated the back of one's throat. "You are going to rub a hole right through that wood. May," a voice called out from the kitchen doorway. May looked up, blowing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. Rosie, the girl who helped with the cleaning and the gossip, leaned against the frame, wiping her hands on a stained apron. Rosie was young, perhaps 19, with eyes that darted like sparrows, missing nothing. "Wood costs money to replace—" "Rosie," May said, though her tone was not harsh. "Dirt is free, but it does not pay the ledger." "Speaking of paying," Rosie lowered her voice, nodding toward the front of the room. "He is still there. Been nursing that same cup of coffee for 2 hours. Must be cold as a well-digger's heart by now." May glanced toward the shadowed corner near the unlit hearth. The man sat with his back to the wall, a strategic position that allowed him to see the door and the window without turning his head. He wore a dusty, long coat that had seen better decades, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, obscuring the upper half of his face. He looked like every other drifter or scout passing through Cinder Creek seeking work with the railroad or the army, rough, quiet, and smelling of horse sweat and leather. But May noticed things others did not. She noticed that he sat with a stillness that was unnatural for a white man. Most cowboys fidgeted. They tapped their fingers, adjusted their gun belts, or spat tobacco. This man was as motionless as a hawk on a fence post. "Leave him be," May murmured, turning back to her work. "He paid for the coffee. 2 bits is 2 bits. The man in the corner was named Tohani, though in this town, he went by the name Tom, to the patrons of the Cinder Creek stop. He was a scout of ambiguous origin, dark-skinned from the sun, with high cheekbones that suggested mixed blood or simply a hard life. Beneath the heavy canvas of his coat, pressed against his sternum where no one could see, hung a piece of turquoise. It was raw, unpolished, and cool against his skin, a reminder of the Dine, the people, and the mountains far to the west where the air was clear. Tohani watched the woman. May Harper was not beautiful in the way the saloon girls down the street painted themselves to be. She was sharp and exhausted, but she moved with a dignity that commanded respect. He had been tracking the Mesa Vultures for 3 weeks, a band of outlaws who killed settlers and left Navajo arrows at the scene to incite war. The trail had gone cold here. In the dust, he needed to know who was feeding them information. He took a sip of the cold coffee. It was bitter, like everything else in this territory. The front door swung open, admitting a gust of hot wind and a man who brought the temperature of the room down despite his smiling face. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Harper," Elias Crow boomed. May stiffened. Her hand gripped the blue bandana tighter. Elias Crow was the government Indian agent for the region, a man charged with keeping the peace between the tribes and the settlers. He wore a suit that was too clean for Cinder Creek, and his boots were always polished, a feat that May found deeply suspicious. "Mr. Crow," May said, not moving from her spot. "We are not serving dinner until 6 o'clock. Crow laughed, a sound that lacked mirth. He removed his hat, revealing slicked-back hair. "I am not here for stew, my dear, just checking in on our loveliest widow. It is a dangerous time. Rumors of savages raiding the supply lines again. A woman alone. It worries me." Tohani, in the corner, did not move a muscle, but his eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. He knew the raids Crow spoke of. He had seen the bodies. They were not killed by the dine. "I have a shotgun behind the bar, Mr. Crow," May said evenly. "And I have the contract to feed the stagecoach passengers. The army keeps an eye on this place." Crow walked further into the room, his eyes scanning the space like a man measuring for curtains. "The army is stretched thin. May, Captain Miller tells me the railroad wants to expand the depot. They would pay a handsome price for this land, enough to clear your husband's debts and send you back east, to civilization." "I am home," May said, her voice dropping an octave. "And the debts are my business." Crow's smile tightened at the edges. He leaned on a chair, his fingers drumming on the wood. "Stubbornness is a virtue, until it becomes a liability. I would hate to see you get hurt because you were holding on to a ghost." "She said she is not selling." "Elias," the new voice was gravelly and sharp. Dr. Larkin stood at the bottom of the stairs, a medical bag in his hand. He was an older man, his face a map of wrinkles and sunspots, with a white mustache that drooped over his lip. He was the closest thing May had to a father, though he would sooner drink turpentine than admit to having a soft heart. "Dr. Larkin." Crow nodded, his polite mask slipping back into place. "Just offering friendly advice." "Your advice usually comes with a price tag." The doctor grunted, walking over to the counter to pour himself a glass of water from the pitcher. "Leave the girl alone. She works harder than any 3 men in this territory." Crow put his hat back on, tipping the brim to May. "Just think about it. Mrs. Harper, the desert has a way of taking things from people who hold on too tight." Crow turned and walked out. As he passed the table in the corner, he paused, glancing at the silent scout. Tohani met his gaze. For a second, the air between them crackled with an unspoken recognition, predator acknowledging another predator. Crow frowned, then pushed through the doors, disappearing into the blinding white sunlight of the street. May let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. She scrubbed the table again, harder this time. "Vulture," Dr. Larkin muttered, downing his water. "Man smells like snake oil and bad intentions." "He knows about the banknote," May said quietly. "He knows I have 3 months left to pay off the mortgage on the expansion Henry built before he died. Henry was a fool to borrow from the company store," the doctor said, though his voice was gentle. "But you will make it. May, you always do." May looked down at the blue cloth in her hands. She did not want to just make it. She wanted to be free. She wanted a life where she did not have to check the horizon for dust clouds or calculate the cost of flour down to the last halfpenny. She looked up and caught the scout looking at her. Usually, she would look away, flush with embarrassment or fear. But today, the anger at Crow made her bold. She held the stranger's gaze. His eyes were dark, almost black, but there was no lewdness in them. There was a sorrow there that mirrored her own. Tohani stood up. He moved with a fluidity that made no sound on the floorboards. He walked to the counter and placed a silver coin on the wood. "Coffee was cold," he said. His voice was deep, textured like the gravel in a riverbed. May blinked. I can get you a fresh cup. I did not mean to leave you sitting." "No," he said. He looked at the bandana in her hand, then up at her face. "Keep the change, ma'am, for the wood." He turned and walked out. May watched him go, the silver coin glinting on the counter. It was too much for coffee. It was an apology, though she did not know what for. Outside, the sun began its descent, painting the sky in violent shades of purple and orange. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The dust town was settling in for the night. The saloons down the street began to light their lamps, and the tinny sound of a piano drifted on the breeze. Around 7 o'clock, the stagecoach from Santa Fe rolled in, shaking the ground. It was late. The driver, a man named Peters with a face like dried leather, hopped down, spitting tobacco into the dirt. "Got a delivery for you, Mrs. Harper," Peters yelled over the snorting of the horses. May wiped her hands on her apron and went out onto the porch. "I did not order anything. Mr. Peters, I am watching my pennies." "Already paid for," Peters grunted. He hauled a small, iron-bound trunk from the roof of the coach and dropped it onto the boardwalk with a heavy thud. Heavy little thing. No return address. Just your name. May stared at the trunk. It was old oak, reinforced with iron bands. It looked like something that had traveled across the ocean, not just the territory. Who sent it? She asked. Ticket said anonymous. Peters shrugged, climbing back up to his seat. I just drive the mules. Ma'am, good evening. He cracked his whip, and the coach lurched forward toward the stables. May stood alone on the porch, the wind whipping her skirts around her legs. Rosie poked her head out the door. What is it? May. A gift. Maybe a secret admirer? Rosie giggled, though her eyes were wide with curiosity. Help me get it inside, May said, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. And lock the door behind us. They dragged the trunk into the kitchen, away from the prying eyes of the few diners left in the common room. The kitchen was warm, smelling of yeast and roasted onions. May dismissed Rosie, telling her to go tend to the customers. She wanted to do this alone. She took a pry bar from the tool shelf. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Life in the West had taught her that unexpected packages were rarely good news. They were usually debts, or belongings of dead relatives. With a groan of metal, the latch gave way. May threw back the lid. The trunk was mostly empty, save for a layer of straw packing. Nestled in the center was a single, thick book bound in black leather. A ledger. May reached in, her hands trembling slightly. She lifted the book. It was heavy. On the cover, there was no title, only a wax seal that had been broken. She opened it to the first page. A loose piece of parchment fluttered out and landed on the floor. May bent down to pick it up. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, as if written on a moving saddle. If you are reading this, you are being watched. May's breath hitched. She looked around the kitchen, suddenly feeling the walls closing in. The darkness outside the window felt heavy, full of eyes. She looked back at the ledger. She flipped through the pages. It was not a diary. It was a record of accounts, but not for dry goods or lumber. January 1858. Payment to MAV, $500. Services rendered removal of obstruction, San Juan Valley. March 1858. Payment to Crow, $200. Silence. April 1858. Henry Harper. Collateral damage. May gasped, dropping the book onto the table. The name jumped out at her like a physical blow. Henry, her husband, he had died in a rock slide while prospecting. That was what the sheriff had told her. That was what everyone said. An accident. Collateral damage. The room seemed to tilt. The smell of the onions became nauseating. This book. This was a record of crimes. Someone had kept track of the bribes, the murders, the land grabs disguised as Indian raids, and somehow it had been sent to her. Why? Because Henry was in it, or because someone knew she was desperate enough to do something about it? She heard the wind howl outside, sounding like a woman screaming. Or maybe it was just the wind. May closed the book and shoved it back into the trunk, piling the straw over it. She needed to hide it. If Crow was in this book, if he walked in here. May! She jumped, spinning around. It was just Dr. Larkin, standing in the doorway, looking concerned. You look like you have seen a ghost. Girl, he said. May swallowed hard. Just tired, doctor. It has been a long day. She could not tell him. Not yet. The note said she was being watched. Who could she trust? The doctor, Rosie, the sheriff drank with Crow every Tuesday. Go to bed, Larkin said gently. I will lock up the front. Thank you, she whispered. But she did not go to bed. She waited until the house was silent, until the snores of the lodgers drifted down from the second floor. She sat in the kitchen, the shotgun across her lap, staring at the trunk. The oil lamp burned low, casting long, dancing shadows that looked like grasping hands. It was past midnight when she heard it. It was not the wind. It was a distinct, heavy thud against the side of the barn, followed by the frantic whinny of a horse Then, silence. May stood up. Her hands were slick with sweat on the wood of the shotgun stock. Every instinct screamed at her to stay inside, to bolt the door and hide under the table. But this was her home. It was all she had. She turned down the lamp until it was just a glowing ember, picked up the lantern she kept by the door, and slipped out into the night. The air was freezing now, the desert heat vanishing the moment the sun died. The moon was a sliver, offering little light. May moved toward the barn, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. "Who is there?" she called out. Her voice shook, but she forced steel into it. "I am armed." No answer, just the rustle of a tumbleweed against the fence. She raised the lantern, the yellow light swinging in an arc. It illuminated the rough wood of the barn, the water trough, and the hitching post. Then, the light caught something wet, a dark smear on the red dust, liquid, fresh. May took a step forward, the smell of copper filling her nose again. But this time it was not the wind. It was blood. She followed the trail. It led toward the back of the corral, where the shadows were deepest. "I said, come out," she warned, raising the shotgun. She rounded the corner of the fence and stopped dead. A man lay crumpled in the dirt, half propped against the wooden rails. He was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. His hat was gone, revealing messy black hair matted with sweat and dirt. May lowered the lantern. The light fell across his face. It was the scout, the man from the corner. Tom. He was clutching his side, blood seeping through his fingers, staining his shirt and the dust beneath him a horrific, glistening black. He looked up, his eyes glassy and unfocused, struggling to find her in the darkness. He tried to speak, but only a wet cough came out. He slumped sideways, his hand falling away from the wound. May froze. The warning in the trunk echoed in her mind. "You are being watched." Was this the watcher, or was he the victim? She looked at the blood soaking into the thirsty earth, then back at the house where the ledger lay hidden. The night was vast and silent, indifferent to the tragedy unfolding in the dirt. May Harper realized, with a terrifying clarity, that her quiet life of paying debts and wiping tables had just ended. She was standing in the middle of a war she did not understand, and the first casualty was bleeding out at her feet. May Harper did not think, if she had thought, she would have left him there in the dirt to die, or she would have run to the sheriff, who would likely have shot the man first and asked questions never. Instead, she grabbed the stranger by the collar of his heavy, dust-caked coat and pulled. He was dead weight, heavy with muscle and unconsciousness. May gritted her teeth, her boots slipping on the loose gravel as she dragged him backward. Every inch was a battle against gravity and fear. She hauled him over the threshold of the back kitchen door, the wood scraping against his leather chaps, and kicked the door shut with her heel. She threw the bolt, then slumped against the door frame, her chest heaving. The kitchen was dark, save for the dying embers in the stove. May hurried to the window and pulled the heavy curtains tight. Only then did she light a single candle, placing it on the floor beside the man. In the flickering light, he looked less like a cowboy and more like a ruin. Blood soaked the left side of his shirt, dark and wet. May knelt, her hands shaking as she unbuttoned the coat. She had to see the wound. She had to know if she had just dragged a corpse into her home. She peeled back the heavy canvas and wool. Beneath the coat, his shirt was torn. May hissed in a breath. The wound was ugly, a jagged tear along his ribs where a bullet had grazed him deep enough to carve meat but shallow enough to miss the lung. But it was not the wound that made her freeze. It was the shoulder. On the skin of his upper arm, there was a faint, puckered scar, a brand. It was an army mark, the kind burned onto scouts who served the cavalry. But next to it, hanging from a leather thong around his neck, the turquoise stone had slipped out, in the candlelight, against his bronze skin. It looked like a piece of the sky that had fallen into the dirt. He was not just a drifter. He was Dine, a Navajo. And in this territory, a Navajo man found bleeding on a white woman's floor was a death sentence for him, and a ruinous scandal for her. May reached for a cloth to press against the bleeding. As she moved his arm, a crumpled piece of paper fell from his clenched fist. It was stained with sweat and blood. May picked it up, smoothing it out on her knee. It was a scrap of a bill of lading. Scrawled across it in hasty charcoal were coordinates, a time, and a single name, Crow. The man on the floor groaned. His head thrashed to the side, and his eyes flew open. They were dark, fever-bright, and seized with sudden panic. His hand shot out, gripping May's wrist with a strength that made her gasp. "Easy," she whispered, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "You are safe." He stared at her, his breathing ragged. He did not look safe. He looked like a wolf caught in a trap, deciding whether to chew off its own leg or bite the trapper. He swallowed dryly, his voice coming out as a harsh rasp. "Water," he said. The word was barely English. "Fire, and I will not harm you." May stared at him. It was a strange thing to say. Water, fire, the essentials of life, or perhaps the elements of his pain. "I know," she said, though she did not know. She pulled her wrist free, firm but not unkind. "Lie still. If you move, you will bleed out on my clean floor, and I will be very cross." She fetched a ladle of water from the bucket. He drank greedily, spilling half of it down his chin. When he finished, he slumped back, exhausted. "You are Navajo," she stated, not asking. He looked at her, his guard coming back up even through the pain. "I am a scout," he said, the lie practiced but thin. "My name is Tom. Your name is Trouble," May corrected. She began to clean the wound with a rag dipped in whiskey. He flinched but did not cry out. "And you have a paper with Elias Crow's name in your hand." At the mention of Crow, the man's eyes hardened. The fever seemed to recede behind a wall of cold. Hard focus. "Crow is a disease," he muttered. "He eats the land." "He is the Indian agent," May said, binding his ribs with strips of linen. "He is the law here." "He is the thief," the man corrected. He looked at May, really looked at her, searching for something in her face. "I need one night. Just one. My horse scattered. The men who did this, they are close." May looked at the door. If the Mesa vultures were out there, they would tear this house apart to find him. But if she threw him out, he was dead. And that name Crow on the paper, linking him to the ledger she had hidden in the trunk not 10 feet away. "One night," May said, standing up. "Before the sun hits the ridge, you're gone, and you stay in the root cellar. If anyone sees you, I lose everything." He nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. "My debt to you," he said. "It will be paid." Morning in Cinder Creek arrived with deceptive innocence. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue, and the smell of sagebrush was crisp in the air. May stood behind the counter of the common room, pouring coffee for 2 teamsters who were arguing about the price of mules. Her hands were steady, but her stomach was a knot of cold dread. Tohani, she refused to think of him as Tom was beneath the floorboards of the pantry, in the dry cool of the root cellar. She had given him dried beef in a canteen. He had not made a sound since dawn. The bell above the door jingled. The air in the room seemed to suck out the window as Elias Crow walked in. He was immaculate, as always. His suit was brushed, his boots shone, and his smile was a practiced weapon. He removed his hat, stepping up to the counter. "Good morning, May," he said. His voice was smooth, like oil pouring over gravel. "Mr. Crow," May said. She forced herself to wipe the counter, keeping the rhythm steady. "Coffee, please." He watched her pour. "You look tired, my dear, shadows under your eyes." "The wind kept me up," May lied. "Rattled the shutters all night." Crow took the cup, blowing on the steam. He did not drink. "Strange wind," he mused. "My men tell me there was a disturbance near the perimeter last night, a horse running loose. They found blood on the fence line." May's hand paused for a fraction of a second before she set the pot down. "Coyotes. Likely, they drag their kills around." Crow's eyes did not leave her face. They were pale eyes, devoid of warmth. Perhaps, but we are looking for a man, a renegade, a scout who decided to turn on his employers. Dangerous fellow, an Indian masquerading as a civilized man. May felt the blood drain from her face, but she turned her back to him to rearrange the jars of pickled eggs. I have not seen anyone, Mr. Crow, just the usual dust and flies. Is that so? Crow walked around the end of the counter. May turned. He was standing too close. He looked past her, toward the kitchen door. His gaze drifted to the corner where the heavy oak trunk sat, covered by a tablecloth she had hastily thrown over it. You received a package yesterday, Crow said softly. From the stagecoach. Supplies, May said, her voice tight. Linens, soap. Crow walked over to the trunk. He ran a gloved hand over the curve of the lid beneath the cloth. May held her breath. If he opened it, if he saw the ledger. Be careful, May, Crow said, turning back to her. His smile was gone. Harboring a fugitive is a federal crime, and in this territory, the punishment is often summary. We would not want this lovely establishment to be confiscated, or worse. He tapped the trunk once, a hollow sound that echoed in the silence. If you see anything, he said, you come to me, immediately. He placed a gold coin on the counter, too much for coffee. Just as Tohani's silver had been too much. It was not payment. It was a bribe, or a threat. When the door closed behind him, May's knees gave way. She gripped the counter to keep from falling. She was not just a witness anymore. She was an obstacle. She locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. She marched into the kitchen, threw back the rug, and opened the trap door to the cellar. Get up, she hissed into the darkness. We need to talk. Tohani emerged, moving stiffly but with surprising quiet. He climbed the ladder, his face pale beneath the bronze skin, but his eyes were alert. He was here, Tohani said. He knows, May said, pacing the small kitchen. He knows about the trunk. He knows about you. If he finds you here, they will hang you and burn my house down. She stopped and pointed a shaking finger at him. You have to go, now. I cannot go without the book, Tohani said calmly. May froze. She stared at him. The book. You know about the ledger. I sent it, he said. May felt the room spin. You sent that death warrant to my house. I took it from the courier 3 days ago, Tohani said. He leaned against the table, clutching his side. I knew I could not hold it. I was being hunted. I needed a place to send it where they would not look immediately. A place that the ledger itself mentioned. May rushed to the trunk and threw off the tablecloth. She unlocked it and pulled out the black book. She slammed it onto the table between them. This lists my husband, she whispered, her voice trembling with rage and grief. Henry Harper. It says he was collateral damage. What does that mean? Tohani looked at the book, his expression softening into something like pity. It means he did not die in a rock slide. Mrs. Harper. Henry found silver in the San Juan Valley. Real silver. Crow and the railroad company wanted that land. They hired the Mesa vultures to clear the claim. May put a hand to her mouth. Tears pricked her eyes. Hot and sudden. They murdered him, she choked out. For a patch of dirt. For the right-of-way, Tohani corrected. And then they blamed it on a Navajo raiding party to justify bringing in more troops to clear my people out. 2 birds, 1 stone. I want it out of my house, May said, shoving the book toward him. Take it. Go. I cannot walk 5 miles in this state, Tohani said. And if I go out there now, Crow's men will kill me and take the book. The proof disappears. Henry's death remains an accident. Crow wins. And if you stay, I will lose my home, May cried. I am a widow. Mr. Whatever your name is. I have spent 2 years scraping grease off plates to pay for this roof. I will not lose it to a stranger's crusade. It is not a crusade, Tohani said, his voice dropping, intense and low. It is justice. That book lists payments to judges, to the sheriff, to the governor's aide. If we get this to the U.S. Marshal in Santa Fe, or to the newspapers in the East, Crow hangs, your debt is wiped clean because the banknote is fraudulent. Or, May said, her eyes flashing, I burn it, Right now. In this stove. And Crow has no reason to hurt me. She grabbed the ledger and marched toward the stove. Tohani lunged. He was injured, but he was fast. He caught her wrist before she could open the iron door. His grip was iron, but his touch was surprisingly warm. "Do not," he commanded. They were inches apart. May could smell the rain dust scent of him, mixed with blood and whiskey. "If you burn that, you burn the truth. You let the men who killed your husband walk free to kill others. Is that who you are? May Harper, a woman who chooses safety over honor?" May glared at him, her chest heaving. "Honor does not put food on the table. Honor does not stop a bullet." "No," Tohani said, holding her gaze. "But it lets you sleep at night." Slowly, May lowered the book. She pulled her wrist from his grip. The heat from the stove was intense, but the chill in her spine was colder. "The marshal is in Santa Fe," she said dully. "That is 3 days' ride." "I can ride in 2, Tohani said, "if you help me." "I am not helping you," May snapped. "I am helping myself. If this book proves the debt is a lie, then I want to read it." She did not trust him. Not fully. But she trusted Crow even less. And the thought of Henry laughing, gentle Henry being murdered for a railroad contract, made a fury bloom in her chest that burned hotter than her fear. She hid the ledger back in the trunk, burying it under sacks of flour this time. "You stay here," she ordered. "I will go to Dr. Larkin. He can get you a horse that won't be missed, but if you betray me—" "I do not betray my allies," Tohani said. He sat down heavily on the bench. "And you are an ally now, whether you like it or not." The rest of the day passed in a blur of tension. May served customers, her eyes constantly darting to the window. Every horse that passed made her jump. The wind picked up as evening fell, howling around the eaves of the boarding house. By nightfall, the town was quiet. May closed the kitchen shutters and began to prepare a broth for Tohani. She was just chopping carrots when she smelled it. Smoke. Not wood smoke from a stove, but the acrid chemical smell of burning tar and dry pine. "Fire!" The shout came from the street. May dropped the knife. She ran to the back door and threw it open. The storage barn, the large wooden structure where she kept the winter hay, the grain, and the extra lumber, was ablaze. Flames licked up the side of the wall, bright orange against the black sky. It was not an accidental spark. The fire had started on all 4 corners at once. "My supplies!" May screamed. Grabbing a bucket, she ran into the yard. The heat was intense, pushing her back. Tohani appeared in the doorway, stumbling but upright, his pistol in his hand. "Get back!" he shouted over the roar of the fire. "It is a trap!" May ignored him. She threw the water at the wall, a useless gesture against the inferno. The dry wood popped and hissed. Suddenly, a voice seemed to detach itself from the shadows near the fence line. It was not a shout, but a low, carrying whisper that cut through the crackle of the flames. "The book. Mrs. Harper. Give the ledger, or give your life." May froze, the empty bucket hanging from her hand. She peered into the darkness, but there was no one there, only the fire, eating her hard work, eating her safety. She turned to look at Tohani. He stood framed in the kitchen door, the orange light dancing on his face, making him look like a demon or a savior. He did not look at the fire. He looked at the darkness where the voice had come from. His weapon raised. The war had not just come to her doorstep. It had just burned it down. The barn burned with a sound like tearing silk, amplified 1,000 times. The heat punched against the night air, turning the cool desert wind into a furnace blast. May stood paralyzed for a heartbeat, the empty bucket dangling from her hand, her eyes wide with the reflection of her livelihood turning to ash. Tohani did not scream. He did not waste breath in panic. He moved with a terrifying economy of motion. He holstered his pistol and grabbed a shovel leaning against the trough. He did not run toward the flames consuming the roof. He ran to the space between the barn and the house. "Dirt," he commanded, his voice cutting through the roar. "Smother the ground. Create a break." May blinked, the spell of terror breaking. She understood. He was not trying to save the barn. The barn was gone. He was saving the house. He was saving the boarding house, her kitchen, the ledger, and their lives. She dropped the bucket and grabbed a hoe. Together, they attacked the earth. Tohani shoveled with a rhythmic, brutal intensity, ignoring the fresh blood that began to seep through the bandage on his side. He threw cascades of red dust and gravel over the dry grass connecting the two buildings. He moved like a machine, or perhaps like the fire itself, relentless and elemental, when a burning beam collapsed, sending a shower of sparks toward the porch. Tohani was there before the embers touched the wood. He beat them out with an old horse blanket he had soaked in the trough, his movements precise. He did not flinch as the heat singed the hair on his arms. May watched him through the smoke. She saw a man who knew destruction intimately, yet chose to stand against it. He was not a savage. As the town whispered, he was a wall. By the time the roof of the barn collapsed inward with a final, defeated crash, the house was safe. The fire, starved of a path to the main structure, began to consume itself. May leaned against the porch railing, coughing, her face streaked with soot and tears. Tohani stood a few feet away, leaning heavily on the shovel. His chest heaved, and the dark stain on his shirt had spread, but his eyes were scanning the darkness beyond the light of the fire. "They are gone," he said, his voice rough. "For now." "They burned it," May whispered. "My winter feed, the lumber for the expansion." "They wanted to burn you out," Tohani said. "They want you to run." "Then they do not know me," May said, straightening up. A cold anger replaced her fear. She looked at the scout. "And they do not know you." Dr. Larkin arrived 10 minutes later, his buggy clattering frantically into the yard. Rosie was with him, clutching a shawl, her eyes wide with fear. "May!" The doctor jumped down, his medical bag in hand. "We saw the glow from the ridge. Are you hurt?" "I am fine," May said. She gestured to Tohani. "He saved the house." Larkin looked at the Navajo man, then at the blood on his side. The doctor's expression shifted from suspicion to professional concern. "Get inside," Larkin ordered. "Both of you. Rosie, keep watch by the gate." In the kitchen, under the dim light of the oil lamp, the reality of their situation took shape. Larkin redressed Tohani's wound, his hands steady despite the tension in the room. "It is Crow," May said, her voice flat. "He knows about the ledger. He knows Henry was murdered." "Crow is just the hand," Tohani said through gritted teeth as Larkin poured antiseptic on the graze. "The head is the railroad. They want a new line through the San Juan Valley. The Dine holds the water rights. Crow hired the Mesa vultures to slaughter settlers and leave Navajo arrows behind. It creates panic. Panic brings the army. The army clears the land. The railroad buys it for pennies." "And Henry?" May asked. "Henry found silver on the land they wanted." Tohani looked at her. "He refused to sell, so they made him an example. And now, you have the proof of who was paid to do it." Dr. Larkin finished tying the bandage. He looked old and tired. "You cannot stay here. May, Crow will come back in the morning with a posse. He will claim this man started the fire. He will arrest you for aiding a fugitive. And while you are in a cell, that ledger will vanish." "I have to get to Santa Fe," May said. "To the marshal." "The main road is watched," Tohani said. He stood up, testing his side. He was pale, but steady. "Crow has men at every station between here and the capital." "Then we go the hard way," May said. She looked at Tohani. "You are a scout. You know the land. Through the salt flats." Tohani shook his head. "It is suicide without water. And with this wound—" "I have water skins," Dr. Larkin interrupted. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded parchment. "And I have a map of the old aquifers, the ones the prospectors forgot." He handed the map to May. Then he pulled a sealed envelope from his pocket. "This is a letter of introduction to Marshal Davies. He is an old friend from the war. He is honest. If you get the book to him, he will listen." Rosie burst in from the back door. "Riders coming from the town? 4 of them." "Go," Larkin said, pushing May toward the back door. "Take my horse. It is tethered behind the smokehouse. It is strong. One horse? May asked. It will have to carry two. Tohani said, We travel light. May looked at her kitchen, at the life she had built. She grabbed a heavy coat, a sack of dried biscuits, and the black ledger wrapped in oilcloth. She paused, looking at the doctor. If I don't come back, you will, Larkin said firmly. Now ride like the devil is chasing you, because he is. The first 2 days were a blur of red dust and heat that shimmered off the ground like a mirage. They avoided the road, cutting deep into the canyon lands where the shadows offered the only mercy from the sun. The terrain was brutal. It was a landscape of knife-edged rocks and twisted juniper, beautiful in a way that promised death to the careless. They rode double on the doctor's roan gelding, a sturdy beast that plodded forward with grim determination. May sat behind Tohani, her arms wrapped around his waist. At first, she held herself stiffly, trying to maintain a respectable distance. But as the hours wore on and exhaustion set in, she found herself leaning against his back. He was solid, warm, and smelled of sage and sweat. He did not speak much, only short commands to the horse or pointing out loose shale. She could feel the tension in his body, the way he scanned every ridge and arroyo. He was in pain. She could feel the hitch in his breath when the horse stumbled, but he never complained. By the third afternoon, they reached the edge of the salt flats. It was a vast, blinding expanse of white, stretching to the horizon. It looked like a frozen ocean, silent and deadly. The vultures are behind us, Tohani said, pulling the horse to a halt in the shade of a rock overhang. He pointed back the way they had come. I saw dust 3 hours back. Can we cross this? May asked, shielding her eyes against the glare. If the doctor's map is right. Tohani said, There is a spring in the center, near the Black Rock Formation. If we miss it, we die of thirst, May finished. We ride at night. He decided. The heat out there will kill the horse by noon. They made camp in a small depression shielded by boulders. The sun set in a spectacular bleed of crimson and violet, bruising the sky before fading into a velvet black studded with stars so bright they looked like ice. The temperature dropped rapidly. May built a small fire, using dried brush small enough to hide the smoke, just enough for warmth. Tohani sat by the fire, shivering slightly. The infection was fighting him. May saw the grimace as he tried to adjust his coat. Let me see it, she said, moving to sit beside him. It is fine, he grunted. You are a terrible liar. Cowboy, she said softly. Take off the shirt. He hesitated, then unbuttoned the flannel shirt. In the firelight, his skin was bronze and smooth, marred only by the angry red line of the wound and old scars that told stories she did not know. May took her sewing kit from her pocket. The shirt was torn badly at the shoulder. I will stitch the cloth, she said. But first, the dressing. She peeled back the bandage. The wound was angry, but not festering. She cleaned it with the last of the whiskey. His muscles jumped under her touch, his breath catching in his throat. I am sorry, she whispered. I know it stings. It is not the sting, he murmured. May looked up. His face was inches from hers. The firelight danced in his dark eyes, softening the sharp angles of his cheekbones. For a moment, the war, the railroad, and the ledger ceased to exist. There was only the desert silence, the crackle of the wood, and the heat radiating from him. She felt a flush rise in her neck that had nothing to do with the fire. She was a widow. She had loved Henry. She had promised herself she was done with men, done with the heartache they brought. And this man, this trouble, wrapped in denim and leather, was the most dangerous of them all. But her hand lingered on his shoulder. His skin was fever hot, but his gaze was steady, anchoring her. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. You could have thrown the book away. You could have vanished into the mountains. I told you, he said. Justice. Justice is a word men use when they want to fight, May said. She threaded her needle, focusing on the torn fabric of his shirt to avoid his eyes. Not war, Tohani said. He reached out, his hand covering hers, stopping the needle. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was incredibly gentle. My father remembers when we fought the Mexicans, then the Americans. It never ends. The blood just feeds the grass. He looked out into the dark. Crow, men like him. They do not fight with honor. They fight with paper. They use laws like arrows. They say this line on the map is ours, and if you stand on it, you die. I saw a family, settlers, like you, good people. The vultures burned them out just to blame my clan. I was too late to stop it. He looked back at her. I am tired of being late. May, I want to use their weapon against them. The truth. May looked at his hand on hers. He had called her May, not Mrs. Harper, not ma'am. You are a good man, Tohani, she whispered. He withdrew his hand slowly, as if pulling back from a flame. He reached inside his shirt and pulled out the leather thong. The turquoise stone swung between them. Take it, he said. I cannot, May protested. It is yours. It is the stone of the sky, he said. It clears the mind. It brings protection. He pressed the cool stone into her palm and closed her fingers over it. When the fear comes, when you think you are falling, hold it. Remember, the ground is solid. May clutched the stone. It was smooth, worn by his skin. Thank you. The moment hung between them, heavy and sweet. If she leaned forward, if he leaned forward. A coyote howled in the distance, a lonely, yipping sound. Tohani stiffened, the warrior replacing the man in an instant. We should sleep, he said, his voice rough again. We ride when the moon is high. The crossing of the salt flats was a nightmare in white. The moonlight turned the ground into a ghostly mirror. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of the horses' hooves on the salt crust. They found the spring, just as the doctor had promised, a small, brackish pool hidden in the shadow of a black volcanic rock. They drank, the water tasting of sulfur, but it was life. By the time they reached the other side, the sun was rising, turning the white ground into a blinding sheet of fire. They were exhausted, their lips cracked, their eyes burning. We are close, Tohani rasped. The stage station at Red Rock is 5 miles through that pass. We can change horses. Send a telegraph to the marshal to meet us halfway. The pass was narrow, a choke point of red sandstone. They rode through it, the horse stumbling with fatigue. As they emerged on the other side, the station came into view. It was a small adobe building with a corral and a water tower. It should have been bustling with the morning changeover. It was silent. Something is wrong, Tohani said, pulling on the reins. He drew his pistol. There were no horses in the corral. The door to the station swung loosely in the wind. Banging against the frame, they rode closer, cautious, every nerve screaming. Look, May gasped, pointing to the water tower. Hanging from the crossbeam of the tower was a shape. It swayed gently in the breeze. A body. It was a man, dressed in the uniform of a station master. A wooden sign had been nailed crudely to his chest. May covered her mouth to stifle a scream. The sign was painted in large, dripping black letters. Thief, liar. Tohani dismounted before the horse had fully stopped. He moved to the base of the tower, scanning the ground. He crouched, touching the dirt. Fresh, he said, his voice cold as the grave. 4 hours. He stood up and looked at May. His face was a mask of grim realization. Tracks, he said, pointing to the disturbed earth around the trough. Heavy boots with a notch in the heel. The vultures, May whispered, clutching the turquoise stone in her pocket until it hurt. They are not behind us anymore, Tohani said, holstering his gun. They knew we would come here. They killed the station master to cut the telegraph line and to leave a message. What do we do? May asked, her voice rising in panic. If they are ahead, we do not stop, Tohani said. He looked at the hanging man, then at the empty horizon where the road led to Santa Fe. But now we know. There is no safe harbor. There is no law until we make it. He walked back to the horse and swung up behind her. His arm wrapped around her waist, tighter this time. Hold on, sweetheart, he said. the endearment slipping out, sharp and protective. The road just got a lot longer. The wind kicked up, spinning the hanging body slowly, accusingly, as they turned the tired horse away from the station and into the open, unprotected desert. The wanted poster was nailed to the support beam of the water trough in the town of Bitter Creek. It was fresh, the ink barely dry, fluttering in the hot wind like a captured bird. May Harper stared at it, her breath catching in a throat already raw from dust. The sketch was crude, a woman with hair pulled back, a high collar, and eyes that looked too hard, but the name underneath was unmistakable. Wanted for arson and grand larceny. May Harper, accomplice to murder. Reward $500. They did not just burn your barn, Tohani said. He was standing beside her, his hat pulled low, pretending to check the cinch on their stolen horse. His voice was a low rumble, meant only for her. They burned your name. May tore her eyes away from the paper. Arson, she whispered. He is blaming me for the fire he set, an accomplice to whom? To me, Tohani said. To the savage who kidnapped you, or the renegade you ran off with. Crow writes the story. May, in the West. The truth is not what happened. The truth is what gets printed on the paper. May looked around the busy street. Bitter Creek was larger than Cinder Creek, a mining hub teeming with strangers. Suddenly, every glance felt like an accusation. The shopkeeper sweeping his porch, the woman carrying a basket of apples, the sheriff leaning against the jailhouse door. They all seemed to be looking for the woman on the poster. We have to get through the checkpoint, Tohani murmured. The bridge out of town is the only way to the Santa Fe Pass. The sheriff has deputies checking wagons. They are looking for a widow and a scout, May said, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt a sudden, crushing weight of despair. They are looking for a criminal and her hostage. Then we give them something else, Tohani said. He turned to her. The harsh sunlight caught the sharp angles of his face, softening the exhaustion etched there. We give them lovers, May blinked. What? Take off your bonnet, he ordered gently. Unbutton your collar, just the top one. Let your hair loose. I am a respectable woman, May hissed, scandalized despite the danger. Not anymore. Tohani gestured to the poster. Now you are a wanted woman. So, be the woman who ran away for love, not for larceny. It is a story these men understand better than politics. May hesitated, then reached up. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the pins from her hair, letting the heavy brown waves fall around her shoulders. She undid the top button of her high collar, exposing the hollow of her throat. She felt naked, exposed, and terrified. Trust me, Tohani said. He swung up into the saddle, then pulled her up behind him. But instead of letting her sit stiffly at his back, he pulled her arms tight around his waist. Lean into me, he instructed. Hide your face in my coat. You are shy. You are newly betrothed. You only have eyes for me. They rode toward the bridge. 2 deputies stood by a wooden barrier, shotguns cradled in their arms. They looked bored but mean, the kind of men who enjoyed the authority a badge gave them over travelers. Hold up, the taller deputy called out. Stepping into the road, he squinted at them. Where are you two headed? Tohani slowed the horse to a walk. He did not look like a hunted man. He slumped slightly in the saddle, a relaxed, easy posture. He flashed a grin that May had never seen before, a reckless, charming, cowboy grin. Heading to the chapel in San Cristobal. Deputy. Tohani drawled. His accent was thick, not with the clipped tones of his people, but with the lazy twang of a ranch hand. Unless you want to marry us right here, my Daisy here is eager. May buried her face between his shoulder blades to hide her terror. She felt the rumble of his chest as he spoke. She let out a muffled giggle, a sound that felt foreign in her mouth. The deputy looked them over. He saw a cowboy with a dusty coat and a woman with loose hair clinging to him like a vine. He saw the way Tohani's hand rested possessively on May's thigh, a touch that was shocking in its intimacy. May flinched slightly at the contact, but she did not pull away. His hand was warm, heavy, and undeniably grounding. For a second, The heat rushing through her veins was not fear. It was something sharper, something that made her breath hitch. San Cristobal is a long ride, the deputy grunted, lowering his gun. He leered at May's exposed neck. She looks a bit worn out, friend. She is just saving her strength. Tohani winked. You know how it is. The deputies laughed, a coarse, knowing sound. Go on, then. Don't keep the priest waiting. Tohani kicked the horse forward. They clattered over the wooden planks of the bridge. He did not remove his hand from her leg until they were a mile past the town, hidden by the bend of the canyon. When he finally pulled his hand away, the absence of his touch left a cold spot on her dress. You lie very well, May said, her voice shaking. She did not know if she was angry or relieved. I survived, Tohani said, but his voice was tight again. The charm was gone, replaced by the grim focus of the soldier. The rain began at dusk, a sudden violent downpour that turned the red dust to slick mud. They took shelter in an abandoned way station barn behind a shuttered inn, 10 miles from the main road. The roof leaked, dripping water onto the straw, but it was dry enough to build a small fire. The air smelled of wet leather, ozone, and damp horses. It was a confined, intimate space, the darkness pressing in around the small circle of firelight. Your bandage needs changing, May said. She watched him wince as he unsaddled the horse. He had been favoring his left side all day. It will hold, he muttered. Sit down. Cowboy, May ordered, finding her footing again. The role of the nurse was safer than the role of the lover she had played on the bridge. I am not hauling a corpse to Santa Fe. Tohani sat on a bale of hay. He stripped off his coat and shirt. The bandage was soaked through with fresh blood and sweat. May knelt between his spread knees, her bowl of warm water and clean rags ready. She worked in silence, peeling the linen away from his skin. The wound was angry, the edges red and inflamed. She cleaned it gently, her fingers brushing against the hard muscles of his abdomen. He hissed in a breath, his stomach muscles contracting under her touch. Sorry, she whispered. It is not pain, he said, his voice rougher than usual. May looked up. He was watching her. His eyes were dark, dilated in the dim light. The rain hammered on the roof, a rhythmic, isolating sound that made the rest of the world feel very far away. She was close enough to see the gold flecks in his irises, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his chest. The memory of his hand on her thigh, the weight of his arm around her, came rushing back. You are good at this, he said softly. Mending things. I am a widow, May said, her voice trembling. I spent 2 years nursing a sick husband before the railroad killed him. I know how to care for broken things. I am not broken. May, Tohani said, just bent. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of wet hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline. The touch was electric. May stopped breathing. You shouldn't, she whispered, though she leaned into his hand. Us, it is dangerous. You are a wanted man. I am a wanted woman. We have nothing. We have the truth, he said. His thumb traced her lower lip. And we have tonight. May let out a shaky laugh, trying to summon her defenses. You are trouble, Cowboy, she smiled, though her eyes were shining with unshed tears. Tohani leaned in. The smell of him, rain, sage, and man filled her senses. He winked, but the gesture wasn't playful this time. It was a vow. Sweetheart, he murmured, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper that vibrated in her bones. I am the kind you marry. May looked at him. She looked for the lie, for the charm he had used on the deputy. It wasn't there. There was only a raw, naked honesty that terrified her more than any gun. Then prove it, she challenged softly. Stay alive? For you, he promised. He closed the distance. His lips were chapped, tasting of salt and rain, but the kiss was soft, reverent. May hesitated for a heartbeat, her mind screaming about propriety and danger, and then she silenced it. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, burying her hands in his thick, damp hair. The fire popped. The rain drummed on the roof. and in the shadowed corner of a forgotten barn, two people who had lost everything found the only thing that mattered. The darkness swallowed them, leaving only the sound of ragged breathing and the soft, steady rhythm of the rain. Morning brought a cold gray light and the harsh reality of the road. They moved out before dawn, the intimacy of the night before packed away like a precious stone, hidden but present. They had to cross the Devil's Spine, a narrow wooden bridge spanning a gorge that cut through the plateau. It was the last bottleneck before the open road to the capital. "Quiet," Tohani signaled. Holding up a hand, they were 50 yards from the bridge. The wind whistled through the canyon, sounding like a mournful flute. "What is it?" May whispered, gripping the back of his coat. "Birds," he said. "They are not singing." Before the words fully left his mouth, a gunshot cracked through the air. Dirt exploded near the horse's hooves. The animal reared, screaming. Tohani fought the reins, keeping them mounted. "Ambush!" he shouted. "Get down!" He spurred the horse forward, toward the cover of a large boulder near the bridge entrance. Another shot whined past May's ear, close enough to snap a stray hair. They tumbled off the horse behind the rock. Tohani was already firing, his Colt Navy barking in his hand. "3 of them!" he yelled over the gunfire. "On the ridge!" May pressed her back against the cold stone. She saw them now, 3 men in dusters, their faces obscured by scarves. The Mesa vultures. They had guessed the route. "They have the high ground!" Tohani gritted out, reloading. "I have to flank them. May, stay here." "No," May said. She reached into the saddlebag and pulled out the spare pistol, a heavy dragoon revolver that felt like a cannon in her hand. "May, no," Tohani warned. "You go left," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I will keep their heads down." She did not wait for his permission. She turned, rested the heavy barrel on the rock, and sighted the way Henry had taught her years ago. "Breath out! Squeeze! Don't pull!" She saw a flash of a brown coat on the ridge. She fired. The gun kicked violently, bruising her palm. The shot went wide, hitting the shale, but the vulture ducked. "Keep firing," Tohani yelled, sprinting from the cover toward the tree line. May cocked the hammer. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were dry. These men wanted to kill her. They wanted to kill the man she cared for. They wanted to erase the truth. She saw one of the gunmen stand up to take aim at Tohani's running figure. Not today. May fired again. This time, her aim was true. The bullet struck the man in the leg. He screamed, his rifle flying from his hands as he tumbled down the slope, landing in a heap of dust. "I got him," she gasped, shock flooding her system. She had shot a man. She had drawn blood. Tohani reached the ridge. There was a brief, brutal scuffle, shouts, the sound of a fist hitting meat, and then silence. The third man, seeing his companions fall, scrambled away, disappearing into the rocks. May sat slumped against the boulder, the smoking gun loose in her hand. She felt sick, but she also felt something else, power. She was not a victim anymore. Tohani appeared at the top of the slope, dragging the wounded man by his collar. He slid down the embankment and threw the vulture at May's feet. The man groaned, clutching his bleeding thigh. He looked up at Tohani with terrified eyes. The Navajo scout did not look like a lover now. He looked like the desert itself, unforgiving and ancient. Tohani crouched. He did not yell. He did not hit the man. He simply took out his knife and began to clean his fingernails. His voice barely a whisper. "You have a long walk back to town on that leg," Tohani said calmly. "Unless you bleed out first, I can fix it, or I can watch the buzzards circle. They are very patient birds." "I don't know nothing," the man stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "You know where Crow is," Tohani said. He looked at the knife, then at the man. "And you know what he is doing." The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The man looked at May, pleading for mercy. May hardened her face. She did not look away. He is moving the books." The man spilled, the words tumbling out. "Not the one you stole, the master ledger, the company books. He is taking them on the noon money train to Santa Fe, to the smelter. Why? May asked. To burn them. The man gasped. The governor sent an auditor. If Crow destroys the master ledger, your book is just a story. It won't match anything. No proof of the payroll. No proof of the bribes. Tohani stood up, sheathing his knife. When does the train leave? 2 days, the man said. He is loading it now at the junction. Tohani looked at May. We have to beat that train. If he burns the master records, our ledger is useless. It becomes a forgery in the eyes of the law. We can't catch a train on one horse, May said. No, Tohani said, helping her up. He looked at the bridge, then at the horizon. We don't catch it. We met it. He turned to the wounded man. Tell Crow you missed us. Tell him we died in the canyon. He knocked the man unconscious with a swift blow to the temple. It was a mercy. Why? May asked. So he feels safe. Tohani said. So he opens the door. The ride to Santa Fe was a blur of exhaustion. They pushed the horse to its limit, then walked when the beast could give no more. They arrived in the capital just as the sun was setting on the second day. The city was a sprawling maze of adobe and wood, bustling with the energy of civilization. But to May, it felt like a cage. They made their way to the address on Dr. Larkin's letter, the Marshal's safe house. It was a modest building on the outskirts, quiet and unassuming. This is it, May said, clutching the ledger to her chest. Her dress was torn, her hair wild, her face streaked with dirt. She looked nothing like the woman who had wiped tables 3 days ago. Ready? Tohani asked. He checked his pistol. Ready? May breathed. She reached into her pocket and squeezed the turquoise stone. They walked up the steps. May knocked. 3 sharp raps. Footsteps approached. Heavy, confident footsteps. May held her breath. This was it. The end of the road. Justice. The door swung open. May's smile of relief died on her lips. The blood froze in her veins. Standing in the doorway, dressed in a fine silk vest and holding a glass of brandy, was not Marshall Davies. It was Elias Crow. He looked fresh, clean, and utterly at home. Behind him, in the parlor, May could see 2 armed men standing by the fireplace. Crow looked at May, then at Tohani. He did not look surprised. He smiled, a gentle, terrible curving of his lips. Mrs. Harper, Crow said softly, stepping back to gesture at them inside. You are right on time. We have been waiting for the delivery. He held out his hand, palm up. The book, please. May looked at Tohani. He was tense, his hand hovering near his gun, but there were 3 rifles pointed at them from the shadows of the room. They had walked into the lion's den, and the lion was hungry. The door creaked shut behind them, sealing out the street, the law, and the light. The silence in the parlor of the safe house was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and smelled of stale cigar smoke and betrayal. Elias Crow stood by the fireplace, the flames cast in long, dancing shadows that made his smile look skeletal. The barrel of a Winchester rifle gleamed in the hands of the man by the window, and another deputy blocked the hallway. May Harper clutched the black ledger to her chest, the leather biting into her skin. The turquoise stone in her pocket felt heavy, a cold weight against her thigh. Where is Marshall Davies? May asked, her voice trembling but audible. This is his house. This is his jurisdiction. Crow chuckled, a low sound that vibrated in the quiet room. Marshall Davies decided to take a very sudden, very permanent retirement. Mrs. Harper, the territory is a hard place for old men. Hearts give out. Accidents happen. Tohani shifted his weight. He was standing slightly in front of May, his body a shield. His hand hovered inches from the Colt at his hip, but he did not draw. He knew the mathematics of violence better than anyone in the room. 3 guns against 1, and May was in the line of fire. You killed him, Tohani said, his voice flat and hard like granite. Just like you killed the station master, just like you killed Henry Harper. I merely facilitate progress, Crow said, taking a sip of his brandy. And progress requires a clean slate. That book you are holding, May, it is a very messy thing. It complicates the narrative. He took a step forward, holding out his hand again. Give it to me, and perhaps, just perhaps, I can convince the judge that you are a victim of kidnapping, a hysterical woman forced to ride with a savage. You can go back to your boarding house. You can bake your bread. You can be safe. Safe. The word hung in the air, seductive and poisonous. For 2 years, safety had been May's god. She had paid her debts. She had lowered her eyes. She had scrubbed floors and ignored the whispers. Safety meant survival. But looking at Crow at his polished boots and his dead eyes, May realized that safety was a lie. There was no safety when men like Crow owned the law. There was only submission. No, May said. Crow blinked, his smile faltering. Excuse me. I said no. May stepped out from behind Tohani. She did not look hysterical. She looked furious. I am not going back to my kitchen so you can sell my husband's murder for a railroad contract. This book does not belong to you. It belongs to the people you buried. Crow's expression hardened. The veneer of the gentleman vanished, revealing the wolf beneath. He set his glass down on the mantelpiece with a sharp clink. Then you will die with the savage. Crow signaled to the gunman by the window. Kill him. Keep the woman alive long enough to sign a confession. The gunman raised the rifle. Tohani moved. He did not go for his gun. He grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the side table and hurled it, not at the men, but into the fireplace. The glass reservoir shattered against the burning logs. The oil ignited instantly. A ball of fire exploded outward, engulfing the rug and sending a wave of searing heat and smoke into the room. Move! Tohani roared. He grabbed May's arm and shoved her toward the kitchen door as the gunman fired blindly through the smoke. The bullet splintered the door frame inches from May's head. They burst into the kitchen, scrambling over the tiled floor. Tohani kicked the back door open, and they spilled out into the cool night air of the alleyway. The depot! Tohani shouted, pulling her to her feet. We need people. We need light. They ran. Behind them, the safe house was already filled with shouts and the orange glow of flames. They sprinted down the cobblestone alley, their boots echoing against the brick walls. May's lungs burned, her legs screaming with exhaustion, but she did not let go of the ledger. They burst onto the main street of the rail yard. The Santa Fe depot was a cavernous structure of iron and wood, lit by hissing gas lamps. A late-night cargo train was steaming on the tracks, the engine idling with a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat. The platform was crowded with crates, mail sacks, and a few weary travelers waiting for the midnight connection. There, May pointed to the telegraph office at the far end of the platform. If we can wire the governor. A gunshot cracked through the air. A bullet sparked off the iron pillar next to May's head. Crow and his men emerged from the alley, weapons drawn. They were not hiding anymore. They were the law, and they were hunting. Get down! Tohani shoved May behind a stack of cargo crates. He drew his pistol and fired back. One of Crow's men ducked behind a water barrel. The depot erupted into chaos. Civilians screamed and scrambled for cover. The steam whistle of the train blew, a long, mournful shriek that masked the sound of the gunfight. You cannot win this, boy, Crow shouted from behind a baggage cart. You are cornered. Give me the book. Tohani checked his cylinder. 3 rounds, he whispered to May. His face was streaked with soot, sweat, and fresh blood where a splinter of wood had cut his cheek. I can hold them. You run for the office. I am not leaving you, May said, gripping his arm. May! He looked at her, his dark eyes fierce. If they take you, the truth dies. If they take me, I am just another dead Indian. It is the story they expect. Change the story. No, May said. She looked at the heavy ledger in her hands. Then she looked at the terrified people cowering behind benches and pillars. They were watching. They were witnesses. We do not need a telegraph, May said, a reckless, terrifying idea forming in her mind. We need a voice. She stood up. May! Tohani reached for her, but she stepped away from the cover of the crates, out into the open gaslight of the platform. She held the ledger high above her head. Elias Crow, she screamed. Her voice was shrill with fear, but amplified by the acoustics of the station roof. "Is this what you want?" Crow poked his head out. He looked stunned to see her standing there. An easy target. He raised his pistol. "Drop it, May," he warned. "This is the ledger of the Union Pacific Land Acquisitions," May shouted, turning to face the crowd of travelers, porters, and station hands. "It lists the bribes paid to the sheriff. It lists the money paid to the Mesa Vultures to burn farms." "Shoot her!" Crow screamed at his men. "Shoot her down!" Tohani broke from cover. He fired 2 shots in rapid succession, forcing Crow's deputies to duck. He sprinted across the open ground, sliding in front of May, his gun trained on Crow. "Do not do it! Crow!" Tohani warned. His voice was not a shout, but a low, deadly growl that carried over the steam. "You want to kill a white woman in front of 50 witnesses. How do you write that report?" Crow hesitated. He looked around. The civilians were watching. The conductor of the train was leaning out of the engine. The anonymity of the desert was gone. This was civilization, and civilization had eyes. "She is lying," Crow bellowed, his face red. "She is hysterical. That man is a kidnapper." "Read it, May," Tohani ordered, never taking his eyes off Crow. "Read the truth." May opened the black book. Her hands shook, the pages fluttering in the wind. She found the marked page. "March 1858, she read, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Payment to Elias Crow, $2,000. Reason silence regarding the water rights in San Juan." A murmur went through the crowd. $2,000 was a fortune. It was more money than a working man saw in a lifetime. "April 1858, May continued, tears stinging her eyes, but her voice not wavering. "Payment to the Vultures, $500. Target Henry Harper. Objective removal of claim. Status collateral damage." "Liar," Crow roared. He stepped out, raising his gun. "That is a forgery. It is signed with your seal. Crow!" A new voice boomed from the entrance of the depot. Crow spun around. Dr. Larkin stood there, looking dusty and travel-worn. Beside him was Rosie, clutching a heavy reticule, and behind them, pouring through the station doors, were 20 men and women. They were dirt farmers, miners, and shopkeepers, people from Cinder Creek and the surrounding towns, people with worn clothes and hard faces. "We heard the lady," the doctor said, stepping onto the platform. He held a shotgun loosely in his crook. "And we know her. May Harper does not lie." "This is an unlawful assembly," Crow shouted, sweat pouring down his face. He backed up, realizing his deputies were lowering their rifles. The tide had turned. "I am the Indian agent. I represent the government. You represent a graveyard," Tohani said. He holstered his gun slowly, deliberately. "It is over. Crow." "The book is open." Crow looked at the crowd. He saw the judgment in their eyes. He saw the conductor writing in his logbook. He saw the end of his career, his power, his freedom. He was a trapped animal, and trapped animals do not surrender. They bite. "It is not over until I say it is," Crow screamed. He swung his pistol. Not at Tohani, not at the doctor. He aimed at May. It happened in the space between heartbeats. May saw the black bore of the gun. She saw the flash of the muzzle. She froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. Then a shadow eclipsed the light. Tohani did not tackle her. He did not push her. He stepped in front of her. He stood tall, chest expanded, a deliberate, immovable barrier between her and the bullet. The shot cracked like a thunderclap. Tohani jerked violently. His body absorbed the impact with a sickening thud. He stumbled back, colliding with May, his weight driving the air from her lungs. "No!" May screamed. The crowd surged forward. Dr. Larkin raised his shotgun, but he did not need to fire. Crow's own deputies tackled him, wresting the gun from his hand as the mob descended. May fell to her knees on the hard wood of the platform, catching Tohani as he collapsed. The ledger fell from her hands, forgotten. "Tohani!" She frantically pressed her hands against his chest. Blood was pouring from a wound high on his shoulder, soaking his shirt. coating her fingers in hot, sticky red. It was too much blood. "Foolish," Tohani rasped, his eyes fluttering. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I told you, I'm the kind you marry. Stop talking," May sobbed, tearing at her petticoat to make a compress. Dr. Larkin?" Larkin was there in an instant, pushing through the crowd. He knelt beside them, his hands moving fast. "You took the bullet meant for me," May cried, her tears falling onto his dusty face. "Why? Why would you do that?" Tohani looked up at her. The pain was etched deep in the lines of his face, but his eyes were clear. He reached up, his bloody hand trembling as he touched her cheek, leaving a smear of crimson on her pale skin. "Because," he whispered, his voice fading, "you are the only good thing in this whole damn territory." May grabbed his hand, pressing it to her lips. The fear she had carried for years, the fear of loss, the fear of vulnerability shattered completely. "Do not die," she commanded, her voice fierce and broken. "Do not you dare leave me alone with this victory. I haven't finished choosing. Cowboy, I choose you. Do you hear me? I choose you." Tohani tried to smile, but his eyes rolled back. His hand went limp in hers. "He is in shock," Dr. Larkin said grimly, applying pressure to the wound. "The bullet missed the heart, but it hit the artery. I need to get him to surgery. Now help me lift him." 4 men from the crowd rushed forward, lifting Tohani's unconscious body with surprising gentleness. They carried him toward the station master's office. May stood up. Her dress was ruined, covered in the blood of the man she loved. Her hair was wild. She looked like a vengeful spirit. She turned to look at where the deputies were dragging Elias Crow away in irons. Crow was shouting, cursing, demanding his lawyer. But May did not look at Crow. Her gaze drifted past the commotion, to the edge of the platform, where the shadows were deepest. A man stood there. He was dressed in an expensive black suit, with a silk top hat and a silver-tipped cane. He was immaculate, untouched by the dust and the violence. He watched the scene with an expression of mild distaste, like a man watching a play that had a disappointing ending. It was the representative from the railroad, the man behind Crow, the man who signed the checks. He met May's gaze. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply tipped his hat to her, a cold, acknowledging gesture. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the steam and the night. May stood trembling, the adrenaline crashing out of her system. The ledger lay at her feet, open to the page that detailed the price of her husband's life. She bent down and picked it up. She closed it with a snap. She turned and ran toward the station office, toward the blood, toward the trouble, toward the only future she wanted. The aftermath of the gunfight at the Santa Fe depot did not feel like a victory parade. It felt like the heavy, suffocating silence that follows a thunderstorm. Elias Crow was dragged away in iron shackles, screaming threats that bounced harmlessly off the stone walls of the station. But the true power in the territory did not scream. The man in the silk top hat, the representative from the railroad, did not run. He stood by the ticket booth, lighting a cigar with hands that did not tremble. He watched May Harper wipe the blood from her cheek. When he approached her, he stopped at a respectful distance, but his eyes were as cold as a snake sunning on a rock. "You have made a great deal of noise, Mrs. Harper," the man said smoothly. "Crow was a clumsy tool. He will be replaced, but the rails, they are iron. They do not bend for widows or sentiments." "Iron rusts," May replied, her voice hoarse but steady. "And tools break." The man tipped his hat, a gesture devoid of respect. "Enjoy your victory. It will be an expensive one. We have lawyers who can bury a boarding house under paper faster than you can sweep dust." He turned and walked away into the night, leaving a trail of expensive tobacco smoke and dread. The ride back to Cinder Creek took 4 days. They traveled in a wagon borrowed from the new marshal, a man sent to clean up the mess Davies had left behind. Tohani lay in the back on a bed of straw and blankets, feverish but alive. May drove the team, her eyes fixed on the horizon, ignoring the stares of the travelers they passed. When they rolled into Cinder Creek, the town was different. The silence that greeted them was not the silence of indifference. People stopped on the boardwalks. Men touched the brims of their hats. Women peered from behind curtains. They looked at May not just as the woman who served them stew, but as something dangerous and fierce. There was respect in their eyes. Yes, but there was also fear. She had touched the fire and survived. May pulled the wagon up to her boarding house. The blackened skeleton of the barn stood as a scar against the red sky, a reminder of the price she had paid. But the house stood. The kitchen chimney was cold, waiting. "Home," she whispered to the horses. The recovery was slow. Tohani was strong, but the bullet had taken a toll. For 2 weeks. May's world shrank to the 4 walls of her kitchen. She moved a cot near the stove, where it was warmest. It was late one evening when she changed his bandages. The lamp cast a golden circle of light over the table. The smell of antiseptic and sage filled the room. "You are healing," May said softly. Peeling away the linen, the wound on his shoulder was pink and angry, but the infection had drained away. "The skin is knitting together." Tohani sat on the edge of the cot, shirtless. He watched her hands. He did not look at the wound. He looked at her fingers, roughened by work, yet gentle as they cleaned his skin. "You have hands like a healer," he said. His voice was stronger now. The gravelly resonance returning. "My grandmother would have said you have the touch." "I have hands like a washerwoman," May corrected, applying fresh salve. "And you have too many scars for one man." She finished the dressing and reached for the basin of water. Suddenly, Tohani's hands shot out. He caught her wrist. It was not a forceful grip. He did not pull her toward him. He simply held her, his thumb resting against the pulse point on the inside of her wrist. He held her as if she were an anchor and he was drifting in a rough sea. May froze. She could feel his heart beating through his fingertips. Or perhaps it was her own heart. "May," he said. He used her name like a prayer. "You should have let me bleed in Santa Fe. You should have walked away." "I told you," May said, her voice trembling slightly. "I had not finished choosing." "And now?" he asked. His thumb brushed her skin, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver down her spine. "The show is over. The crowd is gone. Now there is just a Navajo with a price on his head and a widow with a ruined reputation." "I do not care about the crowd," May said, looking him in the eye. "And my reputation was ruined the moment I learned to shoot a gun." He did not let go. He held her gaze, offering her a chance to pull away, to retreat to the safety of propriety. May did not move. She turned her hand within his grip and interlaced her fingers with his. The next morning brought reality knocking at the door. It was Dr. Larkin, carrying a leather satchel that looked heavier than usual. He sat at the kitchen table, accepting a mug of black coffee. He looked tired. The lines around his eyes seemed etched deeper than before. "The railroad lawyers are already in town," Larkin said without preamble. "They are filing motions to seize your property. May, they claim the land survey from 1855 was flawed. They claim your husband never legally owned the water rights." May gripped her apron. "They are trying to steal it with ink because they could not steal it with fire." "Precisely," Larkin said. He reached into his bag. "However, they underestimate the stubbornness of Cinder Creek." He pulled out a stack of papers. They were crinkled, stained with coffee rings and coal dust. "What is this?" May asked. "Affidavits," the doctor said, a small, triumphant smile touching his lips beneath his mustache. "Signed statements from the blacksmith, the grocer, the stable hand, even the girls from the saloon. They all witnessed the fire. They all know Henry. And they all signed a petition declaring you the rightful owner, and stating that any attempt to seize this land is an act of malice." May picked up the top sheet. The signatures were shaky, some barely legible scrawls of men who held pickaxes more often than pens, but there were dozens of them. "Why?" May asked, tears pricking her eyes. "They ignored me for 2 years. They were afraid." "May," Larkin said gently, "Crow owned their fear, but when you stood on that platform in Santa Fe, you broke it. You reminded them that a spine is meant to be straight. He tapped the papers. This won't stop the railroad forever, but it will tie them up in court for years. And in the meantime, you are a hero. A victim of corporate tyranny, as the Santa Fe newspaper called you this morning. May laughed, a wet, choked sound. A hero who cooks stew. A survivor, Larkin corrected. He looked over at Tohani, who was mending a bridle by the fire. But there is the matter of our friend here. The charges against him were dropped thanks to Crow's confession. But the sentiment, well, some folks are still narrow-minded. Tohani looked up. His face was impassive. I know. You are free to go. Son, Larkin said, back to your people. The Dean are moving north for the season. It would be safer. The room went quiet. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly, 1 second. 2 seconds. Yes, Tohani said slowly. It would be safer. May felt a cold stone drop into her stomach. She turned back to the stove, stirring the pot of beans so vigorously that some sloshed over the side. She said nothing. That night, the tension in the kitchen was thicker than the walls. Tohani was packing his saddlebags. He moved with efficient, maddening silence. He placed his few belongings, a spare shirt, a box of cartridges, a sharpening stone into the leather pouches. May stood by the window, staring out at the dark outline of the desert. You are leaving, she said. It was not a question. I bring danger. May, Tohani said. He did not look at her. He buckled the strap. The railroad will not stop. If I stay, they will use me to get to you. They will say you are harboring a savage. They will burn the house again. So you run, May said, turning around. To save me, to protect you, he corrected. He finally looked at her. His eyes were full of misery so deep it frightened her. I cannot be the reason you lose everything. You're arrogant, May said, her voice rising. You absolute stubborn fool. Tohani blinked. May, you think you are the only one who gets to make sacrifices. May crossed the room in 3 strides. She stood before him, her hands on her hips, her chin high. You think I am some fragile china doll that needs to be put on a high shelf so she does not break. I think you deserve peace, he said. You deserve a husband who can walk down the street without a hand on his gun. You deserve a life that is not a war. I had peace, May shouted. I had a quiet life, wiping tables and counting pennies. And I was miserable, I was hollow. She grabbed the lapels of his coat. I do not want peace. Tohani, I want a man who knows what honor is. I want a man who stands in front of a bullet for me. I want you. May, he whispered, his resolve crumbling. I am dying. I belong to the mountains. Then bring the mountains here, she said fiercely. I do not need you to save me. I saved myself. I shot a man on that bridge. Remember, I stood up to Crow. I am not the woman you found in this kitchen a month ago. She softened her grip, her hands sliding up to cup his face. I need you to stay. Not as a scout, not as a bodyguard, as a man, a decent man. Tohani closed his eyes. He leaned his forehead against hers. He let out a long, shuddering breath, as if he had been holding it for 10 years. It will be hard, he murmured. They will spit at us. Let them spit, May said. I have a shotgun, and I make excellent coffee. We will manage. Tohani opened his eyes. A slow smile spread across his face. The first genuine smile she had seen since the barn fire. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. You are bossy, he said. I am the landlady, May retorted, and rent is due. He laughed. It was a low, rusty sound, but it filled the kitchen. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the turquoise stone. He had taken it back in Santa Fe for safekeeping, but now he held it out to her. No, May said. She took the blue bandana from her pocket, the one she used to clean tables, the one that symbolized her servitude. She tied the bandana around the nail by the hearth. Give it here, she said. She took the turquoise necklace and hung it over the bandana. The bright blue of the cloth and the deep green blue of the stone rested against the rough wood of the wall. 2 symbols of 2 different worlds, hanging together by the fire. It stays, she said. And so do you. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that was slower, quieter, but infinitely richer. The boarding house reopened, but it was different now. The sign out front still said Harper's Boarding House, but the clientele changed. It was no longer just a stop for stagecoach passengers. It became a sanctuary. May cooked. She cooked with a vengeance. Cornbread, thick stews with chili peppers, apple pies with flaky crusts. The smell of baking wafted out into the street, drawing in the hungry. Tohani did not hide. He worked. He rebuilt the barn, board by board. He fixed the roof. He chopped wood with a rhythmic, steady thud that became the heartbeat of the morning. He did not wear his cowboy disguise anymore. He wore his hair long, tied back with a leather thong. He wore his moccasins. When he walked into town to buy nails, he walked with his head high. Some men spat on the ground when he passed. Others, the ones who had signed the doctor's paper, nodded at him. It was an uneasy truce, but it held. One evening, May was in the kitchen, kneading dough for the morning biscuits. Tohani sat at the table, whittling a piece of cedar. He was carving a small horse for the blacksmith's son. "The flour is running low," May noted. "We need to order more from the supply train." "I will go to the station tomorrow," Tohani said. "We can go together." May smiled. "I need new ribbons." There was a knock at the front door. It was late for callers. May wiped her hands on her apron. Tohani stopped whittling, his hand instinctively moving to the knife on the table. "Stay," May said. "I will get it." She opened the door. There was no one there, only the wind and the dust. But on the doormat, weighed down by a stone, was a letter. May picked it up. The paper was thick, expensive cream-colored stationery. It smelled of lavender and city smoke. She brought it into the kitchen. "What is it?" Tohani asked. Standing up, May broke the wax seal. She read the elegant cursive script. "Mrs. Harper, your courage in Santa Fe has garnered attention. There are many in Denver who admire a woman of your fortitude. I represent a consortium of business owners who wish to offer you an opportunity. We have a property in downtown Denver, a large hotel. We are looking for a manager. The salary is 5 times what you make in Cinder Creek. The mortgage would be ours. You would be safe. You would be wealthy. However, this offer is contingent on your immediate relocation. The railroad company is unhappy with your continued presence in the territory. They are patient, Mrs. Harper, but they are not forgiving. If you stay in Cinder Creek, we cannot guarantee your safety when the next wave of expansion begins. Come to Denver. Leave the dust behind. Leave the complications behind. Sincerely, a friend." May read the letter twice. 5 times her income. A hotel in Denver. Gas lights. Paved streets. Police officers who actually enforce the law. Safety. And the condition, leave the complications behind. She looked up at Tohani. He was the complication, the savage, the reason the railroad hated her. If she went to Denver, she could not take him. A Navajo man in a high-society hotel in Denver. He would be a curiosity, or a pariah. She looked at the turquoise hanging by the fire. She looked at the man standing by her table, his hands scarred, his eyes watching her with that quiet, intense devotion. She looked out the window. The sun was setting over the red desert, painting the mesas in hues of blood and gold. It was a harsh land. It was a dangerous land. It tried to kill you with thirst, with heat, with men like Crow. But it was her land, and this kitchen, with its smell of yeast and sage, was her home. "Bad news?" Tohani asked. He saw the shadow cross her face. May folded the letter slowly. She ran her thumb over the sharp crease. "A job offer," she said. "In Denver, a big hotel, money, safety." Tohani went still. "Denver is a good city. You would not have to scrub floors." "No," May said. "I would not." She walked to the stove. She opened the iron door, revealing the glowing orange coals inside. "May," Tohani took a step forward. "They say if I stay, the railroad will come back," May said, watching the fire. "They say it is not safe." "They are right," Tohani said. "It is not good," May said. She tossed the heavy cream envelope into the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and burst into flame. The words promised wealth and safety turned to ash in seconds. "I never liked lavender anyway," May said, dusting off her hands. She turned to Tohani. He was staring at the fire, then at her. His expression was a mixture of shock and awe. "You chose trouble," he said softly. "I chose home," May corrected. She walked over to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head on his chest. "And out here, home is not a place. It is a choice." Tohani wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight. "Then we make it a fortress." May closed her eyes. She could hear the wind howling outside, rattling the panes. She knew the letter was right. The railroad would return. The lawyers would come. New gunmen would be hired. The peace they had was fragile as glass. But as she stood there, held by the man who had ridden through fire for her, May Harper did not feel afraid. She felt ready. She had chosen to stay. Now, the only question was how to live in the path of the storm without being crushed. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, there was warm bread, a warm fire, and a love that was stronger than iron. The seasons in the New Mexico territory did not change with a whisper. They changed with a demand. Winter surrendered to spring not by melting gently, but by cracking the earth open with thunderstorms that shook the foundations of the mesas. And when the dust settled, the world was green for a fleeting, precious moment before the sun reclaimed its dominion. 1 year had passed since the fire. 1 year since the gunfight in Santa Fe. The sign above the porch had been repainted. It no longer read merely Harper's Boarding House. Below the name, in smaller, neat letters, May had added sanctuary. It was not a legal term. It was a promise. The house itself had grown. Tohani, working with a relentless energy that seemed to draw from the earth itself, had expanded the main structure. There were new rooms at the back, built not for paying customers from the stagecoach line, but for those who had nowhere else to go. On a Tuesday afternoon, the common room was bustling with a quiet, chaotic life that would have terrified the May Harper of 2 years ago. In the corner, a young woman with a bruised cheek, a runaway from a violent husband in Tucson, was learning to darn socks from Rosie. At the long table, 2 dine traders were sharing a meal of mutton stew with a retired prospector who had lost his leg in a mine collapse. They spoke a mix of Navajo, Spanish, and broken English, their laughter rising over the steam of the coffee. May moved through the room, pouring water, refilling bread baskets. She moved with a different gait now. The hurried, anxious scurry of the debtor was gone. She walked with the solid, grounded stride of a woman who owned the floorboards beneath her boots. She stopped by the window. Outside, in the newly fenced corral, Tohani was breaking a colt. He was not dressed as a cowboy anymore. The dusty canvas coat and the hat pulled low to hide his face were gone. He wore a shirt of blue calico, open at the throat, and trousers of buckskin. His hair was tied back, revealing the sharp, proud lines of his profile. He moved around the nervous horse not with the brutal dominance of the breakers in town, but with a conversation of touch and breath. He spoke to the animal in his own tongue. The horse's ears flickered, listening. Tohani placed a hand on the animal's flank, and the beast settled, the wildness in its eyes turning to trust. May felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the kitchen stove. He was no longer Tom, the shadow in the corner. He was Tohani. He went into town, and he looked men in the eye. When the shopkeeper sneered, Tohani did not shrink. He simply waited, his silence louder than any shout, until the man looked away in shame. He had not returned to the mountains, but he had brought the mountains to her. He had taught her the names of the winds. He had taught her which plants could heal a fever and which could stop bleeding. And in return, she had given him a place where he did not have to be a warrior every hour of the day. The bell above the door jingled, breaking her reverie. The room went quiet. The chatter at the table stopped. The woman in the corner pulled her shawl tighter. A man stood in the doorway. He was dressed in a suit of gray wool, holding a leather satchel. He looked like every other lawyer the railroad had sent over the last 12 months. "Mrs. Harper?" he asked, stepping inside. He scanned the room, his nose wrinkling slightly at the smell of sage and unwashed travelers. "I am May Harper," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. She did not walk around the counter to greet him. She stayed where she was, her chin high. "My name is Mr. Sterling," the man said, pulling a sheaf of papers from his bag. "I represent the Western Expansion Railway Company. We are conducting a final survey of the water table in this sector. Our engineers believe that the aquifer beneath this property extends further than previously thought. Under the eminent domain statutes of 1860, "Stop," May said. It was not a shout. It was a simple, flat command. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling blinked. "We have played this game. Mr. Sterling," May said. "You send a man with a map. He finds a mistake in the deed. You offer me a check. I refuse. You threaten to involve the territorial judge." "This is not a threat, madam," Sterling said, his voice tightening. "This is the law. Progress cannot be halted by one stubborn woman." "She is not alone." The voice came from the door. Dr. Larkin stood there, leaning on his cane. But he was not alone. Behind him was the blacksmith, his leather apron still on, and behind him was the sheriff, the new one, a young man who had grown up eating maize pies. "Dr. Larkin," Sterling nodded, though he looked annoyed. "This is a private matter." "There are no private matters in Cinder Creek anymore," the doctor said, limping into the room. He took a seat at the table next to the dine traders. "We have decided that we like our neighbors, and we do not like bullies in gray suits. We have witnesses," the blacksmith grunted, crossing his massive arms. "Every surveyor marker you place, we check. Every paper you file, we read. You try to take a foot of this land, and 50 of us will be in the courthouse in Santa Fe before the ink is dry." Sterling looked around the room. He saw the grim faces of the men. He saw the Navajo traders watching him with dark, unreadable eyes. He saw the battered woman in the corner glaring at him with a newfound ferocity. This was not a helpless widow. This was a fortress made of people. "The railroad has deep pockets," Sterling sneered, trying to salvage his dignity. "And we have long memories," May said. She pointed to the door. "The stew is for guests. Mr. Sterling, you are not a guest." The lawyer hesitated. He looked at the sheriff, who was idly cleaning his fingernails with a knife. He looked at Tohani, who had come in from the corral and was leaning against the back door frame, silent and watchful. Sterling shoved the papers back into his bag. "You cannot stop the future. Mrs. Harper—" "We can shape it," May replied. When the door closed behind him, the room held its breath for a second, and then the tension broke. The blacksmith laughed. The doctor pounded the table. May looked across the room at Tohani. He did not smile, but his eyes were shining with a fierce pride. He nodded to her, a small, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. "Good shot," the gesture said. That evening, the desert wind died down, leaving the air cool and sweet. The guests had retired to their rooms or to the bunkhouse. The house was quiet, settling into its timbers for the night. May walked out onto the front porch. The rocking chair creaked as she sat, watching the stars emerge over the jagged silhouette of the ridge. Tohani joined her a moment later. He carried 2 tin cups of coffee. He handed one to her and sat on the railing, facing her. His silhouette was cut sharp against the indigo sky. "He will be back," Tohani said quietly, "or another one like him." "Let them come," May said, taking a sip of the hot, bitter liquid. "We have the affidavits, we have the town, and I have plenty of firewood." Tohani watched her. The moonlight caught the silver threads in his hair. He was barely 30, but the life he had lived had aged him in spirit. "You could have gone to Denver," he said. It was an old conversation, one they touched on like a bruise that was healing but still tender. "You could be sleeping in a bed with silk sheets." "Silk is cold," May said, "and I prefer the dust. It is honest." Tohani reached into his pocket. "For weeks." May had seen him working on something in the evenings by the fire, small pieces of silver he had traded for, hammering them with patient, delicate taps. He held out his hand. In his palm lay a ring. It was not a diamond from a city jeweler. It was a band of beaten silver, heavy and substantial. Inlaid into the center was a small chip of the same turquoise he wore around his neck, the stone of the sky. And etched into the silver band were tiny, intricate patterns, the symbol for a mountain, and the symbol for a house. "In my culture," Tohani said, his voice low and raspy, "we do not give rings to bind a woman. We do not own people." May set her cup down on the floorboards. Her heart began to hammer, a rhythm as old as the land. "But," Tohani continued, looking down at the ring, "I wanted you to have something, not to mark you as mine, but to remind you that you are not walking alone." He looked up at her. His face was open, vulnerable in a way that he never allowed anyone else to see. "I do not promise easy, May," he said. "I am a man with a past that follows me. There will be days when the world hates us. There will be droughts. There will be storms." He took her left hand. His skin was rough, warm, and alive. "I do not promise easy," he repeated. "I promise real. I promise that when you wake up, I will be there. When the fire goes out, I will light it, until the last sun sets." May looked at the ring, then at him. She saw the man who had dragged himself through her door bleeding. She saw the man who had stood in front of a bullet. She saw the man who sat quietly with broken travelers and made them feel human again. "Real," she whispered. "That is all I ever wanted." She nodded. "Put it on." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. It felt heavy, grounding, like the final stone in a foundation. "So," May said, her voice thick with emotion, looking at the silver band, "does this mean I have to stop charging you for coffee?" Tohani laughed. He hopped off the railing and pulled her out of the chair. "It means you have to share the blankets." He kissed her then. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the barn in the rain. It was a slow, deep kiss of a man who had nowhere else he needed to be. It tasted of coffee and night air and a future that was wide open. The sexy love they found in the days that followed was not a performance. It was woven into the fabric of their survival. It was in the way Tohani would come up behind her while she was kneading dough, his arms wrapping around her waist, his face burying in the crook of her neck, breathing in the scent of flour and woman. It was in the way May would watch him chop wood, admiring the play of muscles in his back, and bring him water just to touch his arm. It was in the nights when the wind howled like a banshee, and they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, skin against skin, warm and safe in the dark. The heat between them was fierce. Yes, a reclaiming of life after so much death, but the true intimacy was in the quiet moments after, when he would whisper stories of his ancestors into her hair, when she would trace the scars on his chest and tell him he was beautiful. It was the feeling of being chosen, not once, in a moment of drama, but every single morning when the sun rose and the work began again. The railroad did not disappear. The tracks eventually came, cutting a scar through the valley 10 miles south. But Cinder Creek survived. The Harper House became a legend in the territory, a place where the law of the gun did not apply, and the law of the heart reigned supreme. Years passed. The red dust settled into the lines of their faces. May's hair turned the color of iron, and Tohani's movement slowed, stiffened by old wounds. But the house remained. On a winter evening, decades later, the camera of history pulls back. We see the vast, indifferent darkness of the New Mexico desert. The wind scours the mesas, cold and relentless. The world is empty, silent and harsh. But in the center of that vast darkness, there is a single point of light. It is the window of the boarding house. Inside, a fire is roaring. We can see the silhouette of a woman taking fresh bread from the oven. We can see a man sitting by the hearth, whittling a toy for a child who is sleeping on a rug. The light does not conquer the darkness. It does not try to burn the whole world. It simply insists on existing. It pushes back the night just enough to make a space for warmth. The sound of a horse's hooves fades into the distance. A traveler heading toward that light, knowing that safety waits there. May's voice, older now, seasoned by 1,000 storms, whispers over the wind. Out here, a home isn't a place. It's a choice. And we chose well. The screen fades to black, leaving only the afterimage of the fire, burning bright and defiant against the cold. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a long journey from the dust of Cinder Creek to this final warm fire. And I am truly grateful that you rode along with May and Tohani until the very end. I would love to hear your thoughts. Where are you listening from right now? What did you think of May's choice to stay and fight? Please leave a comment below and share your perspective. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this tale of the Wild West, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Hit that like button to show your support. And if you really want to help this story reach more people, please press the hype button. Your support helps keep the campfire burning and the stories coming. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart true.